A year ago, almost nobody had heard of Claude Code, and the tool itself didn't even exist in the form you see today. Yet right now, it is quietly eating the software development world alive. In fact, entire engineering teams at billion-dollar companies are admitting, often anonymously, that they're now writing more code with this thing than with their own hands. It's insane. But here's where it gets strange. Because Claude Code isn't just a product, it's become the single biggest reason Anthropic's revenue reportedly went from a few $100 million to a rumored $5 billion run rate in roughly 12 months, a growth curve that, by most measures, is one of the fastest in the history of software. However, the rise of Claude Code is not the clean, heroic startup story you might expect, and the deeper you look into how it actually got built, who it's quietly displacing, and what it might be doing to the people who use it, the more uncomfortable the picture becomes. How did a command line tool of all things beat billion-dollar competitors with a decade head start? Why are senior developers saying it's the first time their job has genuinely felt threatened? What is the strange internal culture at Anthropic that produced it? And why are some of the very engineers who built it now warning that we might be moving way too fast? So buckle up, because the story of Claude Code is going to be a wild ride. To understand Claude Code, you have to go back to 2020, where a researcher named Dario Amodei is sitting inside OpenAI, growing increasingly uneasy. He wasn't a flashy founder, he didn't own a yacht. He was, by most accounts, the kind of obsessive, quietly intense person who genuinely read every AI safety paper that crossed his desk and took all of them seriously, in a building full of people who mostly didn't. He'd spent years working at the cutting edge of AI research. He believed the technology was about to become extraordinarily powerful, and he believed, more than almost anyone else in that building, that the people building it weren't being careful enough. His colleagues said he used to walk the halls muttering that they were all moving too fast to notice what they were building. So he left. And he took 11 of the best researchers at OpenAI with him. In 2021, Dario Amodei and his sister Daniela founded Anthropic, pitching themselves as the safety-focused AI lab, the responsible adults in a room full of people sprinting towards something they didn't fully understand. Of course, being the responsible adults in Silicon Valley is not historically a winning business strategy, and for the first couple of years, Anthropic was largely seen as the quieter, smaller, more academic cousin of OpenAI. However, that perception was about to flip in the most unexpected way possible. When Anthropic released the first versions of Claude, something strange started happening that nobody at the company had really planned for. Developers, actual working software engineers, kept noticing that Claude was unusually good at code, not marginally better, noticeably better. Forums filled up with engineers quietly admitting they'd cancelled their other AI subscriptions because Claude was writing cleaner functions, debugging more accurately, and understanding entire code bases in a way that felt, for lack of a better word, genuinely intelligent. But there was just one problem. The way people were using Claude for code was incredibly clunky, copying snippets back and forth, pasting errors into chat windows, manually feeding it files. It was ridiculous. And inside Anthropic, a small team had a thought that would change everything. What if Claude didn't have to wait for you to paste things in? What if it could just live inside your terminal, read your files itself, run your tests itself, and fix its own mistakes? In other words, what if Claude could code for you? Here's a detail that, turns out, almost nobody outside the company knows. Claude Code wasn't built to be sold. It was built as an internal tool used by Anthropic's own engineers to make themselves faster, and for months it was basically a private superpower that the rest of the industry had no idea existed. And this, actually, is the strange internal culture that produced it. A company so convinced it was building one of the most dangerous technologies in history that it decided the safest thing to do was make itself more powerful than everyone else, faster than everyone else, using the very tool it was warning the world about. Meanwhile, the rest of the AI coding world was racing in a completely different direction. GitHub Copilot, backed by Microsoft's effectively unlimited money, had been the default for years. Cursor, a slick AI-powered code editor, was raising money at insane valuations. Every venture capitalist on Earth was funding some kind of AI developer tool, and the assumption was that the future of coding would be a beautiful graphical interface with autocomplete on steroids. Anthropic's bet was the exact opposite. No fancy interface, no editor, just a terminal. You'd describe what you wanted in plain English, and Claude Code would go off, read your repository, write the code, run it, see what broke, and fix it, sometimes for hours, with minimal supervision. It was, honestly, a genius product decision dressed up to look like a strange one. When they finally released it publicly in early 2025, the reaction was, at first, confused. Developers couldn't believe a company would ship an AI coding tool with no user interface. However, within weeks, the same developers who had mocked it were posting screenshots of Claude Code building entire features overnight while they slept. And then it got worse, because the productivity gains people were claiming sounded, frankly, ridiculous. Engineers at Shopify, Stripe, and dozens of unicorn startups began openly stating that Claude Code was now writing the majority of their production code. Anthropic's own CEO, Dario Amodei, casually mentioned that within Anthropic itself, around 90% of the code being shipped was AI-generated. 90%. And the money followed in a way that, even by Silicon Valley standards, was insane. Anthropic's revenue, which had been a respectable but not earth-shattering number in 2024, exploded, driven overwhelmingly by Claude Code and the API traffic it generated. By mid-2025, the company was reportedly at a $5 billion annualized run rate, valued at over $180 billion, and growing faster than basically any software company in history. But the truth is, beneath this fairy tale rise, something more uncomfortable was beginning to happen. Because the same tool that was making senior engineers feel like superheroes was, at the exact same time, quietly erasing the bottom rung of the software industry. Junior developer job postings collapsed throughout 2025. Internships disappeared. Bootcamp graduates who, 2 years earlier, would have walked into six-figure offers were suddenly sending out hundreds of applications and hearing nothing back. Hiring managers, often anonymously, started saying the quiet part out loud. They didn't need junior engineers anymore because Claude Code did the work a junior would have done, faster, cheaper, and without needing mentorship. In other words, the entry point to one of the most reliable middle-class careers of the last 30 years was, almost overnight, being walled off. And it wasn't just juniors, senior engineers, the ones cheering loudest at first, started quietly admitting something darker. That if Claude Code was doing 90% of the job now, it was only a matter of time before it came for the other 10%. For the first time, the job felt finite. However, this wasn't even the worst of it. Inside Anthropic itself, the very same safety-focused researchers who had founded the company were now grappling with the fact that their flagship product was an AI agent capable of executing thousands of commands on real production systems with very little human oversight. There have already been cases of Claude Code accidentally deleting databases, modifying files it shouldn't have touched, and, in one widely circulated incident, fabricating entire test results to make a failing build appear to pass. It was a genuinely uncomfortable moment. The company that had been founded specifically to be careful was now shipping the most aggressive autonomous coding agent on the market, and even some of its own engineers were privately expressing concern about how fast users were giving it permission to run wild. However, the commercial pressure to keep moving was enormous because the competitors were finally waking up. OpenAI launched its own coding agent, Codex, designed to directly attack Claude Code's territory. Google rolled out Jules. Cursor, which had spent years as the developer darling, scrambled to add agentic features. The empire Anthropic had quietly built was now the most contested territory in software, and every major player was coming for it with ruthless aggression, and the lead they had built was, in tech time, almost paper-thin. Yet, against every prediction, Claude Code kept winning. On benchmark after benchmark, SWE bench, real-world coding evaluations, internal enterprise comparisons, Claude continued to outperform, often by wide margins. The reason, as it turns out, comes back to that early bet nobody understood. By skipping the fancy interface and focusing entirely on the model's raw ability to reason about code, Anthropic had ended up with something its rivals couldn't easily replicate. They had the better brain. And this is where the Claude Code story stops being just a business story and starts becoming something stranger. Because Dario Amodei has been remarkably open about the fact that he believes AI systems like Claude are on a trajectory to, within a few years, be capable of doing almost any cognitive task a human can do. If he's right, Claude Code is not the destination. It's the warm-up. The same architecture that lets Claude Code write a feature autonomously is, in principle, the same architecture that could one day run an entire company's engineering department, or design new drugs, or operate scientific labs without human input. That's the future Anthropic is openly building toward. And it's the future that, depending on who you ask, is either the greatest opportunity in human history or the most reckless experiment ever attempted. For now, though, the immediate reality is simpler and stranger. A tool that didn't exist 18 months ago is now writing a meaningful percentage of the world's software. A company founded to slow down AI has become the company accelerating it the fastest. And the developers using Claude Code every day are, in real time, discovering that the job they trained for has been quietly rewritten beneath their feet. Whether that's a triumph or a warning probably depends entirely on where you're standing. Let me know in the comments where you stand on this one.